Over the past few years, central bank digital currencies have gone from being a crazed conspiracy theory to now mainstream UK government policy. Someone who's been following this from the very beginning is my good friend Dominic Frisby. Dominic, what is all the fuss about?
Well, thank you, Nick, and thanks for having me on. And yeah, I have written about it quite a bit over the years, especially on my Substack. But the latest pronouncements came from the Bank of England this week, and they all but said that Britain is going to have a Britcoin, its central bank digital currency, by 2030, possibly as soon as 2025. And I find the whole thing extremely hypocritical because, I mean, if you ever wanted an example of the incoherence at the heart of British political policy, look no further than central bank digital currencies and their attitude towards cryptocurrency generally and Bitcoin. Because on the one hand, you've got Rishi Sunak, who's saying we want to make Britain a digital hub and a centre of crypto innovation and all the rest of it. And George Osborne said the same when he was Chancellor, and Rishi did when he was Chancellor, and then again when he was PM. So you've got this, Britain's going to be the centre of this new innovation on the one hand. And then on the other hand, you've got Andrew Bailey, who's the Governor of the Bank of England, and the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, who implemented all of this when he was head of the FCA, making it impossible for British people to invest in cryptocurrencies. And if you try sending money, for example, to a crypto exchange from a UK bank, it's almost impossible. And there's a very good reason for that, which is because of all the scammers who steal your money. They immediately send it to a crypto exchange. I had a friend of mine who had some money stolen from her account in Revolut the other day, and the money went straight to Binance, to Kraken, and to Coinbase. So, I understand the FCA's logic in trying to stop cryptocurrencies. I don't agree with it, but I understand the logic because they use for scams and frauds and so on. But here is the incoherence. On the one hand, you've got we're going to be a hub, and on the other hand, but you can't do it because they've banned the ownership of it. So it's totally incoherent. And then we have Andrew Bailey, who's been. You know how Bitcoin divides people, and you've got some people who like it and some people who don't. And usually those that own it and those that don't. But you've got Andrew Bailey from the off. He has been Bitcoin is bad, crypto is bad. You mustn't indulge in it. You're going to lose all your money. Blah blah blah. And then he's now going, well, we're going to have a Britcoin by 2025. And you're like, is it good or is it bad? Because are you saying the technology's good? Well, if the technology's good, why don't you encourage people to invest in it? Why are you just trying to stop people from investing it? So the whole thing is deeply inconsistent. And that's just the policy. That's before, I'm sure we're going to get to this over the course of the conversation. We're going to get into the actual nitty gritty of what the implications of central bank digital currencies are and why they're implementing them. We'll come to that in a moment. But that's the broad hypocrisy laid out for you.
There's this populist thought or idea or belief that governments foster innovation, that they're, especially during wars for some reason, that governments are part of science and technology actually being commercialized. But the truth is very much the opposite. It's the government sort of steals and bastardizes ideas from industry and turns them into war machines. And, we don't have safe and easy to run thorium reactors because the government decided it wanted plutonium for nuclear weapons, for example. And I think this is another one of those examples where the government has spotted this technology in the crypto sector and decided, well, we're going to have some of this, and they're going to use it for precisely the opposite purpose that it was all about, which is, freedom and decentralization. And they're going to use the same technology for exactly the opposite purposes. So it's just another example of that happening in history.
I think probably there is some truth. Like, you could in a way say that government fosters innovation in times of war, in the sense that times of war, because of the emergency of war, you do often see technological breakthroughs. And the ultimate source of that technological breakthrough was government funding. So because of the government funding, which has come, in a way that war accelerates innovation, you could say, because people take on more debt, and debt brings everything forward, and there's more spending, and then there's the emergency, we need radar or whatever the new technology is. So I suppose you could say that government does to an extent foster innovation in times of war. But it's not, most innovation ultimately comes from people. There's a huge amount of innovation that just comes from ordinary citizens in the UK. The British have always had this amateur sense of amateur science, if you like, and there's been amazing accidental breakthroughs and inventions that have happened as a result of that. A great example was the scuba divers who got the kids out of the tunnel in Thailand. They were all amateur people with an interest in cave diving, which is a very niche thing. But for some reason, Britain has always produced these sort of eccentric amateur experts, if you like. And by the way, when I use the word amateur, I use it the word amateur derives from the Latin word amare, to love. And so, the implication when you say amateur, oh, well, they're not a professional, they're not an expert. Well, actually, they're doing it for the love. And when people do things for the love of it, they often do it to a higher standard than the guy who does it just for the money. In reality, whatever the self-interest involved is, whether it's money or love of something, or interest or something, or a little bit of both. Anyway, we have this great culture of innovation. So, but yeah, when there is a breakthrough technology, you can bet your bottom dollar that all the PR people in government will be all over it, and they'll try to, own the development themselves. So that covers innovation. But I don't know what the greatest technical breakthroughs in history were. The wheel, was that a result of government technology? Penicillin, was that a result of government innovation and antibiotics? Space tech, I suppose you could say NASA is a government thing, but now most space exploration is privately funded, and so on. So you can make the argument. I mean, the internet, ultimately, I think it had its origins in a government program, but a lot of scientists work for the government, and scientists tend to be innovators. So there is government involvement, but as a libertarian, and I'm sure you share the same sentiments, I like to champion the individual's contribution rather than the contribution of Big Brother.
So you heard it here first. Satoshi Nakamoto was probably an English amateur. Let's move on to the real downsides of...
Sorry, Nick, that's a beautiful example of we still don't know who he was. We clearly know he was a genius, and he had this incredible widespread knowledge at the intersection of 7 or 8 different disciplines, from law to computer coding to spreadsheets to digital money and to libertarian sentiment. But that's a classic example of an amateur. That is, why did he do that? Because he was interested in it.
Yeah. Let's move on to the downsides or the risks of central bank digital currencies. What's the threat here for individual people who, they're not going to go and understand what the ledger technology and the blockchain is. They want to know what this means for them.
Yeah. I often say this about Bitcoin and so on, is a lot of people insist on understanding how it works, and then you explain it to them, and then their eyes glaze over because you've explained it to them and they don't understand it, and then they write it off. Well, most people do not understand how money works. Most people don't understand how the combustion engine works, but we still drive a car. Most people didn't understand the formation of gold and silver in atomic collisions billions of years ago, but they still use gold and silver as money. And most people don't understand, that money is created by the issuance of debt or by quantitative easing, and yet we still use money. You don't need to understand how something works in order to use it. What I do think people need to understand with central bank digital currencies are the implications of it. Now, it's being like the way they framed it as a solution to falling levels of people using cash. That was how they framed it 2 or 3 days ago. Oh, people are using less cash. This is a problem. We need to solve it. You encouraged us to use less cash. It was formally encouraged during the lockdown, and it's sort of happening anyway because digital technology on the whole is more convenient. But so the way they framed it, I mean, it's so disingenuous and I don't even know what the word is, but it's not honest the way that they framed it. But still, there are all sorts of implications to programmable money that are of deep concern. Now, firstly, is that, you know, they'll do it all innocently at first, but it just gives them scope to do so much more further down the line. And they'll say, oh, we're not going to do it. But come the emergency, they will do it. But you can program or anything into money once you start using central bank digital currencies. And, you know, if you didn't think the state was already bloated enough, you know, never mind the invasion of your privacy. You know, one of the reasons income tax has worked so well throughout recent times is that it's deducted at source, and the onus is on the company that you work for to deduct the income tax. And so it's proved a very easy tax to collect. And that's why 50% of government revenue worldwide derives from income tax. Now, it's all very well going, you're going to stand up to the man, you're going to stick it to the man and not pay your taxes. But most people can't do that because the tax is deducted before they ever receive the payment. And central bank digital currencies give unprecedented scope for that to happen, for taxes to simply be taken from your account. And there's going to, as always, there's a culture war over this because there's some people that trust the government. They believe the government is acting in your best interests. That tax needs to be taken to fund the NHS, to fund healthcare, to fund education, whatever it is. And then there are those that go, well, my privacy is being invaded. My power is being impinged upon. But it is going to, you know, fines can be deducted. Eventually we'll be in a time where we have a little chip in our wrist or somewhere, and you just get on the bus and hold your wrist up to the money thing, and your bus fare will be deducted and all that. But with scope, with the scope to collect taxation, there are massive implications. Another huge implication of central bank digital currencies is expiry dates. Now, if we go back to a big philosophical thing, in the 19th century, Britain was on the gold standard, and you actually saw over the course of that 100 years, the purchasing power of money increase. We had a deflationary system of money whose purchasing power increased over time. So that somebody who got paid 100 gold coins in 1800 could buy more with that 100 gold coins in 1900 than he could in 1800. Whereas if you go to 1914, when Britain came off the gold standard, and you can compare what you could buy with £100 in 1914 to what you could buy with £100 today, well, you know, money's lost 95, 99, whatever percent it is of its purchasing power. We're now in an inflationary system of money whose purchasing power decreases over time. And there's everyone who sets government policy is rooted in this idea that we need to keep spending to boost the economy. And, well, if you can impose expiry dates on programmable money, here's your money, you did this job for me, here's your £100 for doing this job for me, but you can't save that £100 and give it to your kids or save it up to buy a house or something, because its expiry date is next year. So you have to spend it by next year. And that just totally transforms the way that people will behave. It will bring a culture of everything brought forward. And that is what governments like, because they need to get re-elected, so they need to prove that the economy is doing well, so they try and encourage people to spend. Never mind the longer term benefits of saving. they'll bring everything forward, and it will totally change consumer mentalities.
I remember when the pandemic began, there was a lot of talk about lockdowns, and according to scientists, I can't remember who, lockdowns were not considered because the governments and the scientists didn't think people would comply. They thought that people would refuse to be locked up in their own houses for weeks on end. And then Italy tried one and it worked, and compliance was high because people were so afraid. And then suddenly governments realized, well, if it works, we should do it. And I see this dynamic being very similar to central bank digital currencies. So I think there's a very long list of government policies out there that they would like to be able to use in certain scenarios. And they can't impose those policies right now because it's too inefficient, or people wouldn't comply with it, or the banking system just technologically can't do it. And what central bank digital currencies really do is they enable that long list of government policies to suddenly become viable. I think that is also the reason this is going to be snuck past us, because that connection is not obvious, right? It looks like it's just a new form of money, whereas there's no inherent connection to that long list of government policies, which may or may not be imposed on us. Do you think that's the key dynamic? I feel like that's why we're going to lose this debate. I think that there is going to be a Britcoin in 2030 or whenever it might be, because people don't understand that distinction that, that central bank digital currencies are going to come about, and then all of these issues are going to become evident.
Oh, like we might win the debate, but we're going to lose the argument. I don't know if that quite makes sense, but they're coming. Central bank digital currencies, no matter what people say, they are coming. It's inevitable. Technology makes them inevitable, and the scope they give for governments to increase their influence is such that government, the state, whatever it is going to want to impose them. And you're absolutely right. My son does economics at Bristol University, and I read some of the stuff that he's set and some of the stuff he comes up with. And there just is this mentality amongst economists that they know better than you. And there's nobody making the case for free markets and individual liberty and all that kind of thing. It's all, we need to do this kind of policy to get this kind of result. And a lot of the time it's just the plaything of economists. But there's this thing called behavioural economics. I'm sure you're familiar with it, and the Ministry of Nudges. And central bank digital currencies are going to give unprecedented scope to these guys to attempt to control our lives. And we just saw during COVID just how effective the Ministry of Nudges can be if it gets something right. It instilled terror across the whole world, really, of the various nations' Ministry of Nudges. Everybody was terrified, and they trusted the government in a time of emergency, and they did what they were told. And, whatever the next emergency will be, in everything I've written, I've argued that money should just be money and nothing else. It should be independent of, it should be gold and silver or Bitcoin or whatever it is, but it should just be money. The problem is money has become a political tool. And so, there's an economic crisis, let's slash interest rates, let's bail out the banks, quantitative easing. Money became a political tool. It's become a weapon of, in the war, in the Russian-Ukraine thing, it became sanctions and confiscating the Russian money and SWIFT and all the rest of it. It's become a political weapon there. And it just has, the reality of the world around us is that money is now a political tool. And exactly as you describe, when somebody decides we need to boost the economy, we need to spend more, or we need this, or whatever somebody at HQ decides, the scope that CBDCs give to governments to use money as a political tool just increases by an order of, I don't even want to put a number on it, but by a huge order. So I'm afraid central bank digital currencies, on the one hand, are a massive blow to those who would fight for individual liberty and money to just be money and independent money and all the rest of it, because it's just going to give. I keep repeating myself, but it's going to give the government unprecedented ability to manipulate, control, survey, and do all these other things to you. On the other hand, I always like to give a note of positivity. John Matonis always says that CBDCs. John Matonis was like a original Bitcoin gangster, if you like. He calls them the on-ramp onto Bitcoin. Now, an on-ramp is the American term. In the UK, we would say a slip road, the road that leads onto the motorway, onto the freeway. And he says CBDCs are the on-ramp into Bitcoin. And what they will do is they'll normalize Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And so one of the accidental, unintended consequences of adopting CBDCs and encouraging them will also be they encourage a Hayekian world of competing currencies. And it might be that the competing currencies are so much better than the central bank digital currency, and they will be if they're designed by independent people rather than the government. They will be better. They won't have the same network, but that can change. So, and a truly international currency like Bitcoin will have greater scalability than the central bank digital pound or the central bank digital dollar, because the central bank digital dollar and the central bank digital pound are always going to be limited by the national borders. So there is the potential unintended consequence that CBDCs usher in Hayekian competing currencies, which force better conduct on governments, because otherwise people just simply won't use the government money except in extremis.
We've come up with a fairly long list of objections to central bank digital currencies. It seems to me, based on what the government released, that they're quite aware of those objections, which I find very interesting. And they have made some steps and declared some intentions to address those objections. They've enshrined the right to use cash in an upcoming law. It won't involve the CBDC, so Britcoin won't involve using an account with the Bank of England. They're making assurances about privacy. Do you think those assurances are relevant? Are you reassured?
No, because they make those reassurances just to get the thing over the line, and then the emergency comes along and they change the goalposts. So no.
How do you think they're going to try and sell this to us then, given there's so many bad sides, obvious bad sides, and I don't really know what the positive sides are.
I have no doubt that the Ministry of Nudges has got all sorts of things planned, all sorts of ideas. Probably one of the ways they'll do it is they'll give you they'll encourage you to get a wallet, and if you get a wallet, they'll give everyone in the country $1,000 or something. They'll probably just print a load of digital money and give it to you. They'll do something like that. There'll be some incentive to do it, and they'll encourage companies. Maybe people who work for the government will have to get their digital wallet, and anyone who works for the government will have their money paid in CBDCs going forward, rather than normal fiat to their bank account. I'm not entirely sure how they'll do it, but they'll find a way.
Yeah, that giveaway is something that China's been doing. One of the funny stories about this is that Nigeria was one of the leading countries when it comes to CBDCs, and the government tried all sorts of different measures to get people to accept and use Nigeria's central bank digital currency, and it completely failed. So I think if the Nigerians know there's something suspect about CBDCs, I don't think we should be using them ourselves.
Well, they have they are known for certain types of financial conduct, and often involving a prince and a massive donation, and that's got your name on it. So one should heed what they do. I gather that the Nigerian CBDCs, one of the reasons that the take up has been rubbish is that it doesn't work, which is always a possibility. And imagine they invent the CBDC and it doesn't work. The Bank of England are just going to look like such a bunch of plums, and they'll, a bit like the roads, they'll probably get private contractors in to build it and design it, and it's just going to become a haven of crony capitalism. But that's one thing that everyone has factored in is what if it doesn't work? And the UK government's in charge of it, so the probability of it not working is extremely high, given their track record with everything else. And so, I quite admire Mervyn King's stance on it, is that the risks outweigh that there are no visible benefits to having this, is what he says. Well, the visible benefit to having this is the scope, and this is the unstated benefit, the scope for more control that it gives to the state. And that's why Sir Humphrey and the Blob are all over it.
What do you think people should be doing if they're afraid of central bank digital currencies?
Well, what I tell my readers in my Substack is that there's just not a lot you can do about it. They're inevitable. And you can rage against the dying of the light, or you can just sort of accept it and be zen and just sort of take the blow and go with it. And I recommend my readers to have a position in gold, and I recommend my readers to have a position in Bitcoin at all times. And those are the two sort of anti-state monies. And there's probably, I don't know what they are yet, but there's probably ways by which you can invest in them. So get your little share of the pie. It's similar to investing in Pfizer or one of those vaccine stocks. There's a extremely immoral argument there, but if they're inevitable, well, maybe invest in them. I personally wouldn't do that, but just keep a position in gold and Bitcoin and your anti-fiat alternatives, and just get on with trying to grow your wealth and have a good life and a good family and all those kind of things. I get there'll be some people who are listening to me talking now, and they'll say, no, we need to, you need to be able to look your grandchildren in the eye and say, I resisted. And maybe we do need to do that, but I just see an inevitability to technology. Gunpowder made guns inevitable. These technologies just make stuff inevitable, and there's not a lot you can do. So, I don't think I'm going to be first to download a wallet. But maybe I'll get two phones, and I'll have my central bank digital wallet on one phone and my other stuff on the other phone. I don't know yet, but I certainly would stick with your anti-fiat, your anti-state alternatives of gold and Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think avoiding reliance on them is the key. At the Fleet Street Letter, we've created a bit of a portfolio of non-financial ideas that are not connected to the financial system. The idea being that if you have sort of a firewall between some of your investments at least and some of your life at least, then that's the best way to go about this. What about you? If people want to follow how do people find out about your take? Because this is going to continue. This is going to progress, so we're going to find out more and more over time. So I think people should be following you, because you're going to be really in the weeds of this, as you have been for a long time now. And I think this could still go a lot of different ways, right? So I think people, as much as it's a bit depressing and dystopian, people should continue to follow this, and maybe there will be some opportunities around it.
Yeah. There might be. My Substack is The Flying Frisbee. It's called The Flying Frisbee, so you'll find it at theflyingfrisbee.com, and you just subscribe, and there's loads of free content, or you can upgrade to paid if you like as well. I will continue to write about it, and I think I've made my stance on it pretty clear, and if I spot any opportunities, I'll be writing them up. But part of me wants to up sticks and run away to the Himalayas or something where no one can find me. But at the other time, I recognise that human beings are social animals, and I'm English and I'm part of England. And so I've got to kind of stay here and play the system, and my family's here and so on and so forth. It's difficult. there is always this urge to flee, flee Big Brother. But yeah, I'll be writing about it. I'll be covering it, and but make no mistake, it is very hypocritical at best. And you know, I often wonder about where the world is going, and sometimes I think it's going to 1984, and sometimes I think it's going to Brave New World. And I've got this new theory that we are seeing the South Africanification of everything, and you know, that's a big theory I'm thinking about at the moment. But certainly in terms of dystopia, CBDCs are going to have a big role to play in that, and the state is going to get unprecedented access into your privacy, into your private affairs, but of greater concern, into your psychology.
I want to recommend to people, after having watched this, to go to your Substack and to look at one of your recent pieces, which is about the decline of the UK. And when I was listening to it, because there's the listening option and the reading option, I just felt like all of these different newspaper articles and stories and radio shows that had been in the air around my head were suddenly aligned into a clear narrative. And you reminded me of a load of things that I've read and heard about. And you drew what we call the golden thread in what you and I do, the narrative that explains how all of this is connected in a sort of a straight line, a straight sequence. And it explains what's going wrong. And I think people should go and check that out. Now, best way to do that is your Substack, The Flying Frisbee. Thanks very much for joining me. And to everyone at home, thanks for watching.
Thanks, Nick.